If you work in the film and TV business, you really don't have much of a life. You know, you're on sets for 15 hours a day, 7 days a week for months. So I was looking for something that wasn't quite that bad.
How do you see those regions change, differ, and also grow or evolve during the years?
I used to tell people that I see more change in the gaming industry in 12 months than I did in other industries in 10 years.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of the SiGMA podcast. Today myself, Trevor De Giorgio, will be speaking to Ike McFadden, who's been involved in the gaming industry for quite some time. Ike currently works for a company called Phoenix 7 and is the Chief Commercial Officer. Ike, who, as we will find out, is someone I've known for some time in the gaming industry now through a particular incident. Good morning, Ike. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm good. Ike, let's just jump straight into it. When I say the name, well, I use the name, the Hoff, what does that bring into mind?
Well, for me, it's David Hasselhoff, who we happened to do at one of my prior companies that I started many, many years ago. We did a game with David Hasselhoff, and that's actually how you and I know each other.
Yeah. What was that game? It was called the Hoff, right?
It was called a couple of things, depending on where it was distributed. It's sort of an interesting story. I used to be in film and television before I got into gaming. So I knew a little bit about that world. And once we got into gaming, we were just sort of young and no one knew who we were. We were trying to make slots. And so we went to ICE and we happened to have a meeting with the guys at Novomatic. And they said, oh, you're from California. Do you know any celebrity that we could use that would be popular? And so we went home and thought about it and did some research. And as everyone knows, David Hasselhoff is popular in Europe and especially popular in Germany.
And Austria.
Yeah. And so once we realized that, I worked through my agent to get in touch with his agent and went to LA, did a pitch at one of the big studio areas. And he loved the idea. And so then we made a game. And we did a lot of video shooting for the game to capture him live. And that ended up being a very surprisingly popular game. I think we distributed that in something like 25 countries and 10 different languages. And it was a really interesting experience.
Yes. And that's how we actually got to know each other during one of those ICE expos where we met David Hasselhoff. I also had the opportunity to meet him when he launched the game in Gibraltar, of all locations. But even over there, a very open person who is, I wouldn't maybe use the word humble, but he was somebody who was very open to speaking to the people and to listening to the people. How easy or how difficult is it to work with celebrities on that level? Because you hear so many horror stories.
Yeah, and there are a lot of horror stories. It really depends on the person. Because I've worked with Hulk Hogan, David Hasselhoff, Dennis Rodman, Dan Aykroyd, and it really depends on the person. I think a lot of people who, if they get famous older in their life, like they're over 30, then they really, really appreciate it. And they really appreciate the fans. And I'll tell you, we were doing a Bloomberg interview once with David Hasselhoff, and at the end of the shoot, there were all these young women from Bloomberg News, 30 of them, waiting for an autograph. And I said to him at some point, because they were so young, I said, how do they even know who you are? And he said, I don't know, but thank God they do. But someone like him was great because he's someone like that who's been in the profession for so long. They're just so good. Like he would do perfect take after perfect take, never make a mistake. And he was very easy to work with.
Okay. I'll flip the coin then. Because being myself a huge basketball fan, being someone who's watched The Last Dance at least 6 times, especially the parts on Dennis Rodman, how hard was it to work with Dennis?
I probably can't go into the details of exactly how hard it was. I'll just say that we were, at that point, I was driving down to a studio in Miami because that was where he lived. Okay. And we were shooting a bunch of promotional elements and game elements. And I got a call on the way down to the studio, and it was his agent. And he said, Ike, Dennis is, he's going to be there. He's definitely going to be there. I said, oh, great. He said, he may be a little late. I said, well, that's okay. I said, and he may be a little tired. I said, okay. He said, because Dennis is coming right from a nightclub. He's been at the nightclub all night. So Dennis shows up, and actually for the first couple of hours, he was in a great mood. He was still kind of buzzing from the nightclub. But as the morning went on, he got more and more tired, we'll say. But he was a very nice guy. He was professional too. And you've never, as you probably know, playing basketball, until someone who is professional throws a ball at you, which we did several takes of with the camera, he threw the ball at me and I was standing off camera. And it felt like getting hit in the chest by a cannonball. Yeah. I mean, someone like that who's just so strong.
So you were in film and television. Was it through your connections with the Hoff and having seen the development of a slot game that you got interested in the gaming industry and got into the gaming industry?
I got into the gaming industry kind of by accident. I lived in LA for a number of years, and I'd worked on movies and commercials and done documentaries, and I'd traveled all over the world. But right after that, I started a PR agency. Okay. And because, to be honest, if you work in the film and TV business, you really don't have much of a life. You're on sets for 15 hours a day, 7 days a week for months. Mm-hmm. So I was looking for something that wasn't quite that bad. So I got into PR, public relations, and we built up a very big PR company and sold it. And at the time, I just wasn't doing anything. I was kind of, just sitting around. And at the time, I had a friend who worked for a land-based slot company. And he said, hey, we're looking for someone who knows media and art. Okay. Would you like to come work? And I said, sure. And it turned out I loved the business because gaming, especially creating casino games, it's actually a lot like doing film and television.
So how long have you been in the industry now?
I think 4,000 years now. I started, Caesar was about 15 years.
15 years, okay. 15 years. I know, well, we've had time because we've also worked with each other on, not just on the Hoff, but on other projects. So you have experience of gaming in Europe now, in the US, where you started, and also in Asia. How do you see these different, I'm not even going to call them markets, but regions? How do you see those regions change, differ, and also grow or evolve during the years?
That's interesting. Because I got into online gaming maybe in 2009 or something. Before that, I'd been doing land-based stuff. And at that time, the online world was really separate from the land-based world, both in Europe and in the US. And I think that was a way that we early on got popular because we were coming from the online world, from the land-based world, and most of the online people didn't even know how that world worked. So they were fascinated that, you've done stuff for Aristocrat and IGT. But I used to tell people that I see more change in the gaming industry in 12 months than I did in other industries in 10 years. So, whether it's Europe or Asia.
Do you see it as being technology-driven, those changes, or is it product-driven? What drives the change, or is it all over?
I think it's a couple of things. It's definitely technology, because the way the online world started, you remember people were using Flash, and you had these very rudimentary games. Early on, you could kind of produce a game that was really not very good, and you'd make a lot of money. So the technology changed a lot. I kind of looked, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the online gaming was like other media industries, music or television, in the sense that it was very young. And everyone, you went to some of the most successful companies and they were run by someone who's 25 years old. And so they were kind of learning things. And then over time, over the 2000s, everyone, especially in Europe, started to kind of start catching up and doing the same kind of marketing and the same kinds of promotions that you would see in places like television or music. And so I would say the industry matured. It finally, and today it's a very mature industry. I mean, compared to the way it was in the past.
Okay, but what basic differences do you see on a regional level? Let's say between Europe and Asia, for example, and Europe and the States, or the States and Asia. I mean, you see, for example, in the land-based, quite a few big names in the land-based sector in the States are also quite well established in Asia. You now see, for example, big resort in Cyprus, which has its roots from the Asian region, the Melco resort. How do you see all of these changes? How do you see the differences or convergences?
I'd go back to my prior answer, is that it's, whether it's the technology between land-based and online or between regions, you see it maturing. So you see, the Asian market 7 or 8 years ago was sort of where the European market was 15 years prior. Okay. And so that they're getting better with figuring out what the players want, figuring out what the mechanics are, figuring out how they want to promote it and keep players. And then bigger areas like, mergers and how you acquire a different kind of technology company that you want to have, or how you start working with affiliates. And so you see each of these regions maturing in the same way. And I would actually say that in a lot of ways, the U.S. is still behind.
In what sense?
Well, you have to remember, really online gaming only became legal and regulated in the U.S. It wasn't, but
it wasn't even U.S. Started off in New Jersey.
Yeah, exactly. And that was only 7 or 8 years ago.
Yep.
So before that, and that's actually an interesting story. But before that, it was all unregulated stuff with companies out of Costa Rica penetrating the U.S. market, and I think. And the U.S. was I think they were very slow, and they were worried about it. They were worried about the legality, and they were worried about the technology. And
do you think maybe the land-based industry were holding them back?
It's not think. It's absolutely certain. And I think rightly so, because people like IGT or MGM, they knew it enough at least to be aware that if they opened up the market now, William Hill was going to come in and eat their lunch. And so they were doing everything legally to make sure that market didn't open up until they were really ready for it. So that it slowed things down in the U.S. for a really long time. And even now it's still kind of slow because it's still on a state-by-state basis. Mm-hmm. So you can't really have like a big liquidity in a game like poker between New Jersey and California because those are separate states. And so there are all kinds of limitations that's caused.
You said you had an interesting story about the U.S. market. What were you referencing to there?
I don't know. What was I referencing to?
We were talking about New Jersey at the time that opened 6-7 years ago. And
okay, yes. Well, there's a fellow named Sheldon Adelstein, I believe.
Adelson.
Yeah, so he was very big in the land-based side of things, owned tons of casinos and contributed to a lot of political organizations. And for a very long time, he was dead set against online gaming in the U.S. And also, he's about 150 years old. So from his standpoint, maybe
he was involved in the stands, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. And he saw online as being something that was going to severely eat into his business. And he did, as I said, he had a lot of politicians who worked with him, and he did a lot of stuff to make sure that didn't happen for a long time. I think he or other people eventually realized that while it might cannibalize some of the land-based business, that it's really a separate business, and that it's really actually a way to grow your players and your customer base, and that it was something extra to gaming, and it wasn't necessarily just competition. So I guess that was my story.
Okay. But I'd like to dive into another point, given what you just said, the political element, the lobbying. It's true maybe on a gaming level the US is a bit behind than the Europeans, given also the piecemeal approach that the US is adopting. But That being said, even in Europe, you're having a dot country approach. You're having all these member states on a European Union level, which are regulating and within their own interest, with just a few countries offering, let's say, a form of or allowing a European-wide operation, but within the limitations of the other licenses. So you've seen, unfortunately, on a European level, artificial borders being created. And over there, maybe you also realize how the industry hasn't worked together enough and hasn't lobbied together enough. But then I look at the States, and I actually think that on a lobbying level, I think the US is far more advanced than Europe. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I would say it's good and bad.
In what sense? Why good and bad?
Well, it's good in that certainly the lobbying business is highly advanced. You've got teams of lawyers in Washington, D.C., and their customers, and they're very good about working with regulators and so forth. So that's the good part. The bad part is at least as of a few years ago, you still had a bunch of different interests. A really interesting one is NIGA, the National Indian Gaming Association. So for a long time, outside of New Jersey and Las Vegas, the Indian casinos were the only place you could go to gamble. And so whether that was Oklahoma, California, Connecticut, you had these groups who, in the same way, were really worried about losing business.
Okay.
And so they were often fighting with Las Vegas about laws, and they were certainly fighting with the online world about laws. So sometimes you have all these groups and all these interests, and sometimes they would come together and get a lot done, but sometimes they would spend 10 years fighting each other.
Okay. So you actually use the words in the US, Washington, lawyers, very good with working with the regulators. Do you think that lobbyists, the industry and the regulators working together can help each other out rather than having regulators who look at the industry in a particular manner and regulate in a, let's say, a more prescriptive manner rather than an open and discussing manner?
I think you're getting there in the U.S. It's certainly a lot better. It's certainly a lot more hand-in-hand working together now than it was 10 years ago. Okay. And you see that in even the last couple of years, the way sports betting has really blown up in the U.S. And I was surprised at how quickly that happened. That went from almost nothing to all the big players having sports betting apps and so forth. And that shows how well they can work together if they decide that's what they want to do. As far as the rest of it, again, I think it's as the industry matures and as one state sees what another state's doing, and they stop being so afraid of it, because there's still most states in the U.S. where it's not legal, and part of that has a religious background to it.
Would that be the let's call them the Bible Belt, the southern states?
That's probably where. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of it is. Some of it's in the Midwest, and some of it there's some very conservative places up in the Northeast, like Maine, I think. But yeah, and even though that you see that law most specifically in maybe sort of the southern states, okay, the Bible Belt, you've got social conservatives all over the country,
okay,
and so the industry had to find a way to make friends with them, but they've always been able to do that. Like if you look at something as simple as bingo, bingo started out in churches in the U.S. often, and then you would get these church groups that pushed for legislation for them, and so eventually it all comes around because everyone wants a piece of the money.
Okay, if it all comes around. California, on its own, in the world, is the fourth largest economy, knocking on the door to become the third because of the slowdown in Germany. This is a statistic I heard yesterday on a podcast. How big would California be if it were to actually open up? Why hasn't it opened up till now?
Certainly, it could be very, very big. As you say, it could by itself be one of the largest gaming markets in the world. The why gets back to the question we spoke about earlier, which there are a lot of tribal casinos in California. I forget the names of the tribes, but some of the largest tribal casinos in the U.S. are in California. So for a long time, you could live in Los Angeles. You can't go to a casino there. But if you drive an hour inland towards the center of the state, you'll see a casino that's as large as any casino you've ever visited in the world. And they have musical acts, and they have restaurants, and they have nightclubs, and it's like a little Las Vegas out in the middle of the desert. So again, you had those groups who were trying to. They weren't on the same page with maybe the Caesars and the Sands and Wynn, because again they were, and part of it's geographic too, because Los Angeles is only about a 3-hour drive from Las Vegas.
Okay.
So you had Indian casinos who were doing well, who were always worried about losing traffic to some other place.
Okay.
And up north, there are casinos in California. So some of it has to do with geography and the awareness that customers have a choice about where they can go. And so everyone's just, and the Indian casinos have done incredibly well. Like there's a casino in Cherokee, North Carolina.
Okay. It's the other side, but no.
Yes, the other side of the country. And that's a fascinating place because it's the old band of, I think it's called the Eastern Band of the Cherokees, who, it's not technically a reservation, it's something called a boundary area, but it's like other reservations, it's essentially its own country. It has its own police force, its own laws inside the U.S. And it's way up in the mountains. You would think you are going up to some ski lodge in rural Switzerland, and then you come over this mountain and there's this huge casino development. Anyway, and they've done incredibly well. I think I was reading that, because I think it's a Caesars, no, it's a Harrah's in Cherokee.
Okay.
And as part of the deal that they did with the Cherokee tribe, a portion of all of their revenue goes to tribal members. So, for example, these days, and the tribal members are fairly small, and it's a fairly small city town. I read that a child of the Cherokee Nation who is a member of the tribe in Cherokee, North Carolina, by the time that they are 18, they will have about $500,000 US in the bank in their name. They don't get it all at once.
Yeah.
But imagine that. Imagine how the kind of good that does. If it was fair, it was in the past a very poor region, and so now you've got this system where anyone who's in that tribe, you come out with $500,000. The tribe will pay for you to go to university anywhere in the world. You've got excellent health care. So anyway, my point of telling that story is a lot of these tribes have done very well for themselves, and so they're very careful about
So
losing
they
it.
fear the online.
I think
They don't see the online as a plug-in or an add-on to their existing product base.
They certainly did in the past. Again, I think that's changing because now you've got a group like Harrah's in there who they understand. And so it may take another 5 years for them to push it inside the tribal boundary or in all of the state of North Carolina, but it'll eventually happen. Again, because it just does so much good for so many people.
We only have a few minutes left, but there's some recent news which I'd like to discuss with you. I am a huge follower of Barstool. A few months ago, Dave Portnoy, who owns Barstool, and whoever is following us, I really recommend that you look up Barstool on YouTube and you look up at some of the people who produce content because it's also a platform where YouTube vloggers can put their content there. One of the most famous is the Wonton Don, who actually was here a few months ago in Malta, and he has a series on Malta which is on Barstool. So yeah, I recommend the Barstool, but especially Wonton Don. But at the time, Dave Portnoy sold to Penn, something like 380 million. Penn came in wanting to use Barstool as their betting platform. If I have anything wrong, you correct me there.
No, you're right so far.
Unfortunately, there was some conflict because some let's say, content creators felt they were being restricted. Eventually, I think this was last week or 2 weeks ago, Dave Portnoy bought Barstool back for $1. $1. With a condition in the contract which states that when he sells, or if he sells, half the value of what he sells goes to Penn. And yesterday, Dave Portnoy went live on YouTube and he said that changes are coming and we're going to get the old Barstool back. In fact, he's redoing his pizza reviews because one bite, that was all that you are allowed. It's his famous one-liner. So Dave Portnoy bought back his company for $1 after a few months ago having sold it for $380 million. I have to ask the question, how does that work?
Dave Portnoy he's a very interesting. I don't know him personally, but I've paid attention to him. He's an interesting character in that he's obviously clearly a good businessman, but like some of the other modern entrepreneurs, like say Elon Musk, he clearly understands social media. Like Tesla, for example, doesn't have any kind of real marketing division. It's just Elon Musk on Twitter.
Yeah, X now.
Yeah, X, right. And I think Portnoy was very similar in that he was such the personality behind it. He didn't mind offending people. He projected a kind of a really honest, open personality.
What I like is the way he defends his content creators. He really defends them.
Yeah, and I think you see that a lot in every industry where you've got some business that's doing really well because the person running it has a really specific vision. And it's not a vision everyone likes. Yeah. Some people don't like it or they get offended or whatever. And then they sell to a big corporate entity.
Especially right now, because his vision is for the boys.
Yes. Yeah. And so then you get corporate people who come in and take it over. And then you have an entire marketing department who frequently have marketed nothing else in their life but this one company. Mm-hmm. And they spend more time worrying about who they're going to offend than whether anyone likes anything. So, it's good for him. I mean, and honestly, there are a lot of companies that do their best work. You're not ever going to please everyone.
Yeah.
It's better to just please the people who like your stuff.
In fact, Penn now partnered up with ESPN. I think it's something like 150 million. Mm-hmm. So it's actually cheaper than Barstool. If I'm not mistaken, again on the numbers, because I was following all of this yesterday, preparing for today. But it's impressive that Penn, a well-known brand, went first to Barstool, which to the rest of the world is not as well known as ESPN. But the truth is, times are changing. ESPN being a traditional media outlet, but having a strong brand, was not the preferred candidate initially. How can, because a few weeks ago as well, I follow American sports religiously, ESPN, let's say, cut quite a few big names from their roster of presenters, quite a few big ones. Some people had been there for quite some time. How do those big brands, but traditional media outlets, evolve? How can they evolve?
I'll be a little cynical and I'll say probably except for the very best ones, they won't evolve. Because the media landscape now is so different. And it's not just ESPN, it's Disney, it's Fox, it's everyone you see going through the same thing where they really, about all they have is the brand because they're losing viewers or audience members left, right, and center. I think Disney lost something like $1 billion US over the last 3 or 4 movies. The Indiana Jones movie was a catastrophe.
Yeah, Disney deciding to fight with Ted Cruz did not help them in the least.
Yeah, so it's... the ones who will survive will be the ones who kind of get their head on straight and stop worrying about offending everyone and start worrying about creating good content. Mm-hmm. And I think that's... Disney will always be around, but... and same with ESPN, but it's really, at this point, it's just the brand. Yeah. And it's also a brand that doesn't mean too much to younger people.
We really need to close, but this subject I really am interested in, because someone else who was going to ESPN but then decided to pull out, Pat McAfee, the former Indianapolis Colts punter,
Yep.
he has awesome content. He's live every day for 3 hours. But he does not care what he says or what people think about what he says. Is that the direction that media is going in today?
Again, the successful ones, and I'd say that
In America?
I'd say it's really global because
Okay.
you've got personalities who are doing their own content. They don't need the big brands anymore. You know, Dave Portnoy could have just gone ahead and just made money off of his YouTube channel and Twitter feed for the rest of his life. And I keep coming back to the same thing. You've got these very conservative types in marketing and legal, nothing personal, to legal professionals, who they spend more time worried about problems than worried about their content or their customers.
Not all lawyers.
No, not all.
Because I actually was seeing a podcast on Barstool where their lawyer was present, and I wouldn't mind being their lawyer, I'm going to be honest.
And I think, like I said, that's the successful companies will find those people. But you understand why it's a problem. You look at like a place like England, where they've got really restrictive things on advertising.
It would never work in the
Yeah,
UK. Portnoy's method, Pat McAfee, they would not work in the UK. To a certain extent, again, I'll go on sports. Rich Eisen, he actually presents the NFL Hall of Fame event. He is present for the draft, the draft day, whole presentation, the rookie minicamp. He's there. He is the face of the NFL. But he has his own podcast, the Rich Eisen Show. He does not want to sell. It's something he does for a passion. I don't see that model working elsewhere in the world. I think it depends on your audience as well, or not, Ike?
Well, I mean, certainly in the EU, I agree with you, but you see more and more people, casino operators, developers, who are now, maybe they've got a studio, on some island in the Pacific, because it's a global industry. And when you've got crypto casinos and so forth, I think even though the EU and the US have tried to really tighten down on stuff and be very regulated, I don't know how long that regulation is going to last. And I think that opens up a whole area for anyone who's willing to be creative and do something different, because you can feel the difference. You can feel when you're being talked to by a big corporation.
Yes.
And you can feel when you're being talked to by a human.
By a brother.
Yeah.
Ike, this was, especially talking about media, hopefully we'll have another opportunity to discuss, rather than just gaming, but we'll move into media and alternative media sources. But it was a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for being our guest today on the SiGMA podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you next episode. Thank you.